good morning, or good afternoon, depending on where you're signing in from. We certainly span a couple continents today, so definitely appreciate everybody joining us. I'm really pleased, of course, to be joined today by John Black, Aldebaran CEO, and Dr. Kevin B. Heather, the company's Chief Geological Officer. So I'll say, gentlemen, how are you doing today?
Doing very well.
Very good.
Awesome. So no, we got big news, so I'm just going to get through a couple pieces of housekeeping first. I'll just let you know how today's going to work. So first, John and Dr. Kevin are going to walk through a presentation regarding this week's news release. Then they'll get a number of questions that came in advance over email, but today is also an interactive event, so there will be questions from the live audience that we're excited to get to answer. So that chat box in the bottom right of your screen, please use it anytime during the event to ask them some questions. Now, I will say I'll be kind of jumping around with questions during that period, fitting them into the conversation where it feels most fluid. If we don't get your question today, either because we ran out of time or it's a bit off topic for what we're hoping to discuss, I'm going to be sure that the Aldebaran team gets it and gets back to you as soon as possible. As a final piece of housekeeping, I will say today's event is being recorded and will be available as a replay probably early this afternoon. So it'll pop right in your inbox. But enough out of me. John, I'll give it to you to lead off today's presentation.
Okay, well, great. Thanks, Romeo, and thanks to you and your team for setting this up. As I've mentioned before, we really enjoy this format. It's a way we can help people understand what we put out in a news release, get a little bit deeper into it, and field some questions. And as you mentioned, for any questions we can't get to, or if people think of additional questions, please feel free to contact us. Ben Charrington, who's our manager for IR, is probably the easiest person to get in contact, and he'll get the question to the right person. So anyway, as we've been discussing in several of the last webinars, over the last year, we've been building towards a mineral resource estimate that we anticipated would be a very substantial increase in the size, and we're very pleased this week to be in a position to put it out. So what we've announced this week is that we've more than doubled the size of the mineral resource on our Altar copper gold project in San Juan, Argentina. So pretty exciting event for us, a major milestone, and we've taken what was already a very large deposit and turned it into clearly one of the largest undeveloped copper assets that's in the hands of a junior company particularly. So I might remind people that this is part of our strategy overall. So we're a group that specializes in identifying these types of opportunities, acquiring the project when the market's down or there's a special circumstance. And then a key part of our strategy is first to show the full size of the project, which is the milestone that we're announcing today. And then that puts us in a position to begin to de-risk the project further by producing a PEA and a pre-feasibility study. That PEA we anticipate we'll have out in the middle of next year, which is the next major milestone to be watching for on the project. But we'll have a very active program between now and then. As we've got the rigs turning already, we have 4 rigs on site turning, a 5th one showing up very soon, with an option to add additional rigs as we kick into the season after the holidays. So pretty exciting time. It'll be a very, very busy program this year and continued information. It will be making a transition towards more pre-feasibility type activity during this year and less drilling out new resource, but that's a very critical stage to move forward on the project. And this is all in the context, of course, of being in the right place in the sense that Argentina right now is really opening up as probably one of the premier sites in the world as a destination for mining investment to develop large projects like this. We've seen some major announcements like BHP and Lundin Mining tagging together for Filo and Jose Maria. And San Juan remains one of the most active places on the earth right now for copper exploration. It's a perfect time for us to be putting the accelerator down on this project and rapidly moving it through the PEA and pre-feas. And keep in mind that we just announced a few weeks ago the new agreement that we have with our strategic partner Rio Tinto Newton, which provides us with the financing in a non-equity dilutive manner to move the project forward very quickly. So some very major news that's come out on the project in rapid succession over the last month or so, and setting us up well for a very, very active year coming up. So it's a very exciting time for us to be on this project. So I'll turn this over now to Kevin, and Kevin's going to walk us through all the details of the mineral resource. We're designing this for both the average investor to be able to understand what it is, but also for those of you that are more technically inclined, we'll be getting into details on how the resource was calculated. But as I mentioned, please feel free to contact us with any questions you might have. So over to you, Kevin.
Okay, thanks, John, and thanks, Romeo, and thank you everyone who's tuning in either live or who will be watching this via video replay. Typical forward-looking statement disclosure. I will be making forward-looking statements. To get us started, I know many of you tuning in probably already know where we're located, but for those that don't, we're in Argentina within San Juan province, which has been rated the #2 jurisdiction for exploration investment and mining investment in all of Latin America in the last Fraser Institute study. You can see up in the northern part of San Juan, up in this area, you can see the Filo del Sol, Luniwase, and Jose Maria. Lots of news came out of there this about a few months ago with BHP and Lundin Mining consolidating that. And where we're located is the other large cluster of world-class porphyry, copper, gold deposits sitting down here in the southwestern portion of San Juan, located about a 7-hour drive directly due west, of the capital, San Juan. Zooming into this area, we can see that the Altar project has neighbors to the south, the Los Palambres mine in Chile of Antofagasta Minerals, about 25 kilometers south of us. And adjacent to that, the El Pachon project, another giant copper porphyry deposit held by Glencore that's currently in feasibility. And then about 45 kilometers due to the northeast of us is McEwen Copper's Los Azules, another giant copper project. So we're in elephant country here. Just zooming in, we have a large property position, and what you can see that I've outlined is where the pit shells are. You can see the blue lines are from the 2021 resource. Those are the pit shells. And then you can see the gray is the new pit shell that we're going to be discussing and the new resource we're going to be discussing. And just to clarify, what we released on Monday and what we'll discuss today is only the resource from the Altar Central, Altar United, and Altar East area here. We're currently working on a resource for the radio and an updated resource for the QDM gold deposit. And that should be coming out sometime in probably Q1 next year. So just zooming in, this is a diagram for those that have been following us. It's one that we've used a fair bit. You can see the gray outline here is the 2021 conceptual resource pit. The main mineralized areas are the area here, which is the Altar East area, and this is the Altar Central area. And we always prognosticated there might be something sitting here in the middle. That resource in 2021, just to refresh people's memory, was, as John mentioned, already a very large resource. Over 11 billion pounds of copper in the measured and indicated categories, and another 1.8 billion in the inferred category, with a significant amount of gold and silver as byproducts as well. And you can see that one of the interesting things back in 2021 was that a lot of the resource was already in the measured and the indicated categories, and that's what you can see here highlighted in the red and the orange color. So we had a good base to start to work towards with this new updated resource that we put out on Monday. And if those of you will remember that we had mineralization that sat below the pits. This is again the 2021 pit, and we had these tails of mineralization where there were calculated mineral resource blocks, but they weren't included in the resource because they didn't fall within a mineable pit shell. So that 2021 resource is just what you see sitting inside the pit shell there. Back in 2021, one of the quotes that I put when we released that resource, I think it's good to refresh our memories, is at that time we had relogged over 115,000 meters of drill core, did a substantial amount of geological and structural mapping, and a lot of other technical studies over a 2-year period that led us to believe that the resource we were putting out was only the point or the point on the iceberg here, and that there was truly a lot more mineralization to be found. And we thought that by continuing to uncover this value through good science and the drill bit, that it would bear fruit in the future. So this is what the drill pattern looked like back in 2021 for that resource estimate. And again, you can see the areas of the Altar central area sitting in here, and the Altar East area were the principal area of focus, and very limited deep drilling here in the center portion of between the two. Fast forward to today, and we've completed over 63,000 meters of drilling. We've infilled that area in between. That's the new Altar United discovery. And you can see how it's unified now, this mass of mineralization. So that's why we've always said that we think that this would be a substantial upgrade to the resource. And to those of you, again, who have been following us will remember that we also had this very large geophysical conductivity feature, and that almost everywhere where we drilled into that feature, we found long runs of very attractive copper, plus or minus gold and molybdenite type mineralization. Just to refresh memories again, we had some very long, spectacular intercepts in that Altar United area. I'm not going to go through this in detail, but I do recommend people to, when they're reviewing the resource, is in the press release, there is a table that gives notes and the metal prices that we used. And it gives some of the criteria that were used. And I again recommend that people look at this so they understand how this resource was calculated. I think the main thing for today that I would like to point out is basically the prices that we used here. Back in the 2021, we used $3 copper and lower gold and a lower silver price. And so that's one of the main differences in the model between one and the other. So again, the quotes from this year's 2024 resource, again, I don't want to belabor this. I want to get to the part which is the model and having a look at that. But really, this is a culmination of work. When we originally did the due diligence before Aldebaran even existed as a company, we were looking at the project through due diligence in 2017. And it was back then that the technical team from Regulus at the time recognized that there might be some unproven potential at the Altar project. And really, this is the culmination of 7 years of conviction, hard work, and the eventual discovery and definition of the Altar United, which is really what's allowed us to unify and create a large mass of mineralization here. And I think the other thing that's quite critical is with this new resource is that 66% of the resource tons are classified as measured and indicated. And that means that there's a much higher confidence level in the resource as we move forward to the PEA and PFS levels. So again, just to go back, this is the 2021 block model showing the confidence intervals, which I already showed you. And this is the 2024 resource model with the new pit shell. And I'll just spin this around a little bit so that you can kind of see through it and see that we've substantially increased the mineralization. You can see there's a good core of measured and indicated mineralization in there. That's the reds and the oranges, and the inferred which is out towards the edges of the main mineralization is the more in the inferred. And you can see the numbers here. I'll go through these in a little bit more detail in a couple of minutes. So this is what really is inside the resource, the stuff that falls within that pit shell. One of the critical things for people to understand is that when we did the 2021 resource shell, we were only allowed to use 40-degree pitch slopes. But because we've done a lot of geotechnical work and analysis, we were able to demonstrate that the rock quality at Altar is very good. And that allowed us, for this resource calculation, to push the resource shell to 45 degrees. And that makes a huge difference on being able to, A, go after deeper mineralization, but also it helps in terms of taking more mineralization versus waste. So this just shows, again, now I've eliminated the inferred resource, and you can only see the measured and indicated. So you can see that the bulk of the mineralization in here, a substantial portion of it is in the measured and indicated categories. And this is really, really critical when we start to move towards the PFS, because in the PFS, we can only use measured and indicated blocks. And so this means that we've already got a substantial amount of mineralization in those categories, and that will allow us to move forward without a lot of costly infill drilling. There will be some, but not nearly what would be the case if there was a lot more inferred inside the pit shell. And again, there is a little bit of blocks that you can see that fall outside the pit shell, but not very many. Just to look at it in terms of the copper grade, so this is copper equivalent, and you can see this is showing everything greater than 0.1 copper. So you can see there's a really large mass of mineralization. Some of it extends outside of the current pit shell and therefore outside of the current resource. This is the greater than 0.3 copper equivalent. And then I think the most critical part here is the greater than 0.5 is still a substantial amount of mineralization that you can see that sits inside the pit shell there. Hopefully everybody's not getting seasick. So I think the other thing that's really critical, and we've subdivided, and this is in the press release, we subdivided the resource into different mineral zones, because depending on the pathway forward for processing, it's important to know what material belongs to what mineral zone. And so in this case, you can see we've broken it out into basically three types of mineral, the supergene, a mixed zone, and then the hypogene, or the primary. And it's really important because depending on whether we decide to go for a concentrator flotation, maybe we have an early heap leach and then we transition to a more traditional flotation with a concentrator. Or in the case of Newton, maybe we just go with heap leach for everything. So those are the kinds of trade-offs that we'll be evaluating both in the PEA and also in the pre-feasibility study. You can see that we've already got a significant amount of mineralization in the supergene and the mixed categories. The part that's interesting is the supergene grade is slightly higher and also has a slightly elevated arsenic relative to the hypogene. And that's important because in a heap leachable environment, the arsenic will be sequestered in a mineral called, or it'll be changed from one of the sulfide minerals like energite or calcus or tenantite and converted into scorodite, which is an arsenic oxide, and it's inert and it's insoluble in water and would stay within the heap leach pads and therefore not be an environmental problem, and obviously would also not report to a concentrate, because we wouldn't be producing a concentrate, we'd be producing copper cathode in country. You can see that the arsenic grades here are lower. They're almost half of what they are up in the supergene. And so that's good, so that if we do at some point elect to go with a concentrator, the arsenic quantities here are manageable. There will be penalties. And that's another thing that I'd like to point out, is that this resource estimate was calculated assuming a traditional concentrator with flotation with arsenic, appropriate arsenic penalties. And then finally, you can see that the total mineralization that we're reporting is a significant increase over what we showed before. But I'll go through some slides that show that in a bit more detail. So just to, again, show where some of these mineral zones occur, what I've show here is, you can see in the orange, that's the leach cap. So that's the part of the rocks that are right at surface and that all the copper has been stripped out of those rocks. And then sitting below there, you can see in the blue, that's the supergene plus the mix zone. And that's where all that copper that got stripped out of the orange unit got deposited into the blue unit. And that's where we've got, that's the material that's amenable to traditional heap leach technology. But also Newton could get that with their technology as well. And then everything below that is the hypogene, and that's where Newton becomes something quite interesting, because there we're looking at the possibility of being able to heap leach all of this sulfide material, whether it's supergene or it's hypogene. So that's work that's in progress and test work that's currently underway. So the resource. As reported, measured and indicated resource is 2.4 billion tons of 0.42 copper, 0.07 grams per ton gold, and some minor silver and a little bit of moly. The key thing is 22 billion pounds of copper in the measured and indicated categories, 5 million ounces of gold, and almost 94 million ounces of silver. And then an inferred resource of another 1.2 billion tons, grading slightly less, 0.37 copper, 0.04 gold, for another almost close to 10 billion pounds of copper, and another 1.7 million ounces of gold, and almost 50 million ounces of silver. I don't expect you to see and read all the details of this chart, but this really, if you focus on the lines that are highlighted in yellow and in the light orange color, you can see that we've basically, in the measured and indicated, we've increased the tonnage by 100%. In the inferred category, we've increased it by 542%. In terms of copper grade, we lost about 3%, but that's because we're starting to pull in some mineralization that's coming from the outer portions of the deposit, where the grades are slightly lower. You'll see that there's a bit of a loss in the gold grade, and that's because as we go deeper into the deposit and the Altar United area, there's less gold associated with that, and so that's what's reflecting that decrease in the gold. And you can see the decrease in the arsenic in that upper measured and indicated area. That's significant. And then there's an increase in the inferred, but that's really just because we've got this huge increase in the amount of inferred now. So to put this in a more graphic form that I think is easier to see, we've increased the measured and indicated tons by 100% from 2021 to 2024. Like I mentioned, we've increased the inferred tons almost 542%, from just over 189 million tons to now 1.2 billion tons. We've increased significantly the amount of contained copper. This is not copper equivalent. This is actual copper, representing a 94% increase in the measured and indicated copper pounds from 11 billion pounds to just over 22 billion pounds. In the inferred category, we've increased the copper pounds 462% from 1.75 billion pounds of copper to 9.8 billion pounds of copper. In terms of gold, we've increased in the measured and indicated gold ounces, we've increased by 48% from 3.4 million ounces to roughly 5.1 million ounces. In the inferred gold ounces, we've increased 338%. And silver, obviously, we've also significantly increased, almost 143% in the measured and indicated categories, and almost over 900% in the inferred categories. The mineralization is still open in several directions, although it does tend to start to decrease in grade as we move out towards the outer edges of the mineralization, and that it is amenable to open pit mining. So this is the cutoff, and some people are probably wondering, well, we said that we used a similar cutoff, which we did, $13.99 NSR per ton cutoff, but the actual copper equivalent cutoff has dropped now to 0.24, whereas in the 2021 resource, it was 0.3 copper equivalent. And the main reason for that is because of the change of using slightly higher copper, gold, and silver metal prices to calculate this new resource. Therefore, the cutoff in terms of copper equivalent actually has dropped. But it's the reason why we picked this number was so that there would be an apples to apples comparison. If we actually look at the resource using the break-even cutoff, which is roughly about a $5 NSR per ton, or roughly 0.1 copper equivalent, you can see that we dramatically increase the available tons in the measured, indicated, and inferred categories, but we also decreased the grade by doing so because we're starting to include some of the more lower grade material out towards the edges of the deposit. This is a diagram that was put together by Desjardins Capital Markets, and basically it shows the current position now of Altar in terms of total contained copper in billions of pounds, copper equivalent pounds. And this is a bit of a tricky diagram because we're not allowed to actually put this together, but this comes from a third-party source. But you can see it's really one of the few ways that we can demonstrate where we sit relative to the other deposits that currently sit in the hands of juniors. And we've effectively moved up to the 5th largest copper project in the world held by a junior. And you can see a statement that was put out just a day or so ago, yesterday, I believe, from one of the analysts from Red Cloud Securities. Altar is one of the largest undeveloped copper gold deposits in the world, and we believe it should be sought after by major mining companies. So where are we at in terms of our field campaign? Well, the field campaign is well underway. These are some of the high-level objectives. We're budgeted and approved for roughly 25,000 meters of drilling, and that'll be diverse types of drilling, which I'll show in a minute. These 4 photographs actually show the 4 rigs that are really drilling as we speak right now. And John mentioned that in the next day or so, we have a 5th rig showing up, and then we have an option to increase to add more rigs in the new year should we deem that necessary. The priority right now is to complete large diameter PQ drilling for our phase 2 Newton metallurgical test work. This is high priority because there's a long lead time. basically what we're doing here is that we're in phase 1 test work right now, where we're evaluating 1 meter high columns. We don't have any data or information back from that yet, but phase 2 would involve constructing 10-meter high columns that would simulate what a lift would look like in a real heap leach pad when it was constructed. And so we need a large volume of material to fill those 10-meter columns, and therefore that's why we're drilling this PQ, and that's why we're trying to get this as quickly to the folks at Rio Tinto Newton, because this test work will take time. And we hope to have these phase 2, or at least the in-flight phase 2 results to contribute to the the PFS that will come out at the end of 2026. We also will focus on converting some of the in-pit inferred resource blocks to indicated for the PFS. We've just got this block model literally last week. And so this is work that's ongoing, and right now we're working on where we need to drill those infill holes. And most of that infill drilling will be starting probably in January, after we finish these PQ holes for Newton. We'll also be looking at whether there's some gaps or holes in the resource block model. And again, that planning is in progress. We'll also be looking at drilling waste conversion holes in any of the potential PEA, PFS pit shell simulations that we've done, in order to make sure that when we're heading to the PFS, that we're bringing along as much measured and indicated mineralization as we possibly can, in order to have that fall into any kind of economic analysis and cash flow. We do have to drill a select number of dedicated oriented geotechnical holes. This will be a requisite for the PFS, and therefore it's important. And that's a bit of specialized drilling, so we will be doing some of those holes as well. And then we'll also be completing a fairly extensive program of downhole televiewer and sonic imaging, again for geotechnical program. These are to really understand what potential the pit walls will look like, and what the structural framework is of any pit design, etc. And so this is, again, very critical path information that we need to collect for the PFS. We also will be completing water pump tests for pit dewatering and water balance studies. Again, an item that we definitely need for the PFS. And so we'll be completing that work as well. We think we can we've got existing water wells that we drilled over the last few years, and we can use those to do this test work. And then obviously we're advancing on other PEA and PFS studies. So we're on schedule. I know that there are some that think that we never deliver on time. Well, we've delivered the new updated resource when we said we would. And now the next milestone is we've started the drilling as we forecast. The engineering, environmental, and all those studies have also commenced. And the next really, I think, important milestone will be the delivery of the PEA by the end of Q2 next year in 2025. And I'm pretty confident that we will hit that milestone. We've got much of the information. Really, the critical piece of the information that we're waiting on is the in-flight phase 1 Newton results. So that will be incorporated into the PEA. And as part of the PEA, what we're looking to do is to look at 2 trade-off case studies. One, a conventional concentrator with flotation, assuming arsenic penalties and marketing of a copper con. And the other one would be a Newton option, where we're doing sulfide leaching, and we're producing cathode in country and marketing that cathode probably in country as well. So that would be the next real major milestone that people should be watching for. So Altar, I think everybody can see, is one of the largest undeveloped copper deposits in the world. It's gotten substantially bigger. It's still got room to grow, but at this stage, more mineralization we really don't need. We need to be focused on moving the mineralization we have towards more economic analysis to demonstrate that the deposit is economic. And we're clearly located in an emerging hotbed in Argentina for exploration and mining. And I think we're the right management team, and we're the partners. We have the partners to execute on this plan. So I just, in the final few slides here, what I wanted to try to show because I know a lot of you out there are investors, this is the Aldebaran Stark chart over the last 4 years and up until yesterday. And you can see that we've had a pretty good chart compared to a lot of our peers, in that we've been constantly kind of ticking up. And you can see just in the last little while here, we've had this pretty decent run up in terms of, us announcing that we signed this option agreement with Newton for them to earn into 20% of the project. And then obviously the thing we're talking about today was the new updated mineral resource estimate. So one of the things that we constantly see or hear is, well, looks like Aldebaran's had its run up. There isn't any more upside. Therefore, I've missed the train. What I want to try to put into context for you here, this is the stock chart from our previous company, Antares Minerals, over a 5-year term. And you can see starting here in November of 2004 and went to the final sale of the company in 2010. And what you can see is that there's a lot of up and downs. At one point, we were up to almost $5 here. The global financial crisis came. We plummeted down to here to 37 cents. And then we slowly started to recover. We put out an updated resource, not unlike what we've just been going through here today. And then quickly on the heels of that, put out a PEA, which wrapped the first mineral economics around this large resource that we had at the Hikera project. And that's when we started seeing the uptick, to the point where First Quantum announced that they were going to acquire Antares Minerals for $650 million US. So what I want to show you is what I've done, what our guys have done here, is overlaid that same Aldebaran price chart that I just showed you over the same time period onto the Antares one. And you can see this jump up in the share price that Aldebaran's had here in the last little while. And I think what I want to try to put into context here is, you can see there's when we did the updated resource for the Hikera project back in 2009. And here's where we're delivering the resource for the Altar project in 2024. And the PEA is on the horizon here within the next 6 to 7 months. And so I think what the takeaway message here for me and for you is, because I'm a shareholder like you are, is Aldebaran still has plenty of room to run up. And any idea that you might have say that you missed the train, no. The train's starting to leave the station, so you better get on board, because I think that we may see a very similar chart here over the next months. So in conclusion, I'd just like to once again thank my exploration team in Argentina and all the hard work and effort that the teams put into getting us to this major milestone over the last 7 years. Without their hard work and dedication, we wouldn't be here talking about what I think is truly a significant deposit, and that it's got bright future ahead. So with that, I'll turn it back to Romeo, and we can open up for some questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the thorough presentation. Now, there's a couple of questions that came in over email. See, there's a lot of great questions in chat, so really appreciate it. We're just going to go through a couple of the ones that came in on email first. First one is, who owns the NSRs on the property?
I can pick that one up. There's a 1% NSR over the project that is held by Orion. That was an NSR that was originally generated in favor of Rio Tinto when they optioned the project to Peregrine Metals. Then it went through a series of different groups, and so it went to Orion. And I just misspoke. That was subsequently acquired by Osisko, so it's now held by Osisko Gold Royalties, a 1% NSR on the project. Also keep in mind, the way things work in Argentina is the provincial government has an option for a royalty on the project. That applies to all projects, but in terms of additional royalties, 1% to Osisko Gold Royalties.
Great, thank you. This one I think is for Kevin. Do you see a starter pit in the deposit?
Yeah, that's why it was, yes, yeah, we do. And that's why, in most of these types of deposits, porphyry coppers, the first mineralization that you encounter is the supergene enrichment blanket. And that's why I pointed out that the grade is actually slightly higher in that zone than it is in the main hypogene zone. And so that's really important because that's the first material that will get mined. And so that's where a lot of our test work we're doing with Newton is focused on, because that's really where the early economics are critical for the deposit development. And so that's where any kind of pits are going to want to try to go after that material first, obviously, because it's closest to the surface.
No, makes sense. There was one question about cutoff grade, but Kevin, I think you already tackled that. But if you do have additional questions, let me know in the chat. One question, can Rio increase their investment via Newton?
Yes, that's the news that we just announced a few weeks ago, and I'd refer back to the webinar we did on that for more complete review of that. But Rio Tinto Newton has an option to acquire a 20% direct interest in the project by making a series of option payments. They've made the initial payment. The total sum of those option payments will be $250 million US to acquire a 20% interest, with a final larger payment of that due upon completion of the pre-feasibility study. So the important aspect for us on this is that we receive a series of payments as we complete milestones in the project that are direct payments to us. They're not an equity placement, so it's non-dilutive in an equity sense to us, and that provides the funding we have to go forward. So on the charts that Kevin showed on the anticipated additional value added to the company as we clear critical stages on this, that has to be counterbalanced with issuing equity to fund a project typically. The beauty of the announcement that we've just made with Rio Tinto Newton is we have access to that funding without having to issue additional shares. So that maximizes the value for our current shareholders, which is a pretty creative agreement that we put together. And it gives Rio Tinto Newton a pathway to acquire a 20% toehold in the project moving forward, and maintains our flexibility to attract other suitors for the remaining portion of the project. So it's a pretty creative deal that was put together, and I'd make reference to the webinar we had where Adam Greening, our Senior VP for Corp Dev, walked everyone through the details on that a few weeks ago.
Great, thank you. This is a combination of a couple of questions that a few people are finding it hard to find sellers. So I'll just pose it to you generally. How do new investors that want large positions buy shares?
Well, the principal thing is you have to go open market on it right now, because we're not in a situation where we'd be doing a major financing certainly for the Altar project moving forward. And so having said that, we are well aware that a number of our new shareholders over the last year or two have created fairly substantial positions by just being patient and persistent in buying in the open market. And when we see a large run up like we've just seen now, we have a lot of shareholders that came in only a few years ago at 40 cents and that type of range. And so some of them will probably lighten up their positions and make some shares available. So our volume has increased over the past few months, and it's a great time to be establishing a position now. You'll have to be patient, but you have to get in the market to get it.
Great. This one, somebody wants to wade into the grade versus scale debate. But curious if you could elaborate, either one of you, on the importance of scale over grade for copper mining.
Want to do that, Kevin?
You can tackle that one if you want.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll jump in if I have something intelligent to add.
Okay. Well, what we're seeing overall in the porphyry copper space is that the average grade of large porphyries has been decreasing, notably, in existing mines and in the new mines that are being put into production. It's just the reality of where we are in copper exploration in the world. And so that's been countered by price increase, which also facilitates being able to exploit lower grade copper deposits. But we can point to several analog deposits that are recently expanded or recently put into operation. If you take a look at something like Cobre Panama and exclude the political issues associated with it, that's a large deposit that mines an average grade in the 0.3x range, and was recently built at a fairly large capital cost and highly profitable due to the large volume that's run through it. Also, if you take a look at Cerro Verde or Quebrada Blanca, large deposits in Peru and Chile, those are multi-billion ton deposits, similar to what we're talking about, that are operating in quite low grades moving forward. And you counter that just by having very large volumes to be able to produce the copper. So that's kind of the reality of projects. We would all love to have a higher grade project, but you compensate that by having a much larger volume.
That makes sense. DB from the chat, we've already covered this, but I guess good to reiterate. What's the timeline for the PFS?
The PFS is what we're stating is that the PFS we're aiming to deliver by the end of Q4 or during Q4 of 2026.
Great, thank you. JMac wants to know if you're using the same drilling contractors in the past drill season.
Right now we have 4 rigs and a fifth one coming. We do have 3 machines from Bort Longyear who drilled for us the last few campaigns, and we have 2 machines from Foraco, which is a new contractor for us. And I can report that both are drilling quite well. The production rate is quite good, and so far so good. And we are drilling the PQ, and we're drilling down to, in some cases, 400 meters of PQ, and in some other cases, we'll be going to 800 meters with PQ. So everything so far looks very good, and that's really, I think, the fruits of working with the contractor over the last few years to help them help us. So
sure, that makes sense. Bill from the chat asked, is most of the current ongoing drilling primarily infill drilling?
Well, as I stated in the presentation, up until Christmas, it'll be focused on this large diameter core collection for the Newton test work. So metallurgical drilling in simple terms. And then after that, we will be focusing on infill drilling to fill in potential gaps that we have in the resource model where there are no blocks. There aren't a lot of those. Or trying to make sure that we convert as much of inferred material to indicated in those early pit shells, in order that when we go to the PFS, we're bringing along as much of the mineralization as possible. So that's really what the primary focus is. But there will, like I mentioned, there will also be some geotechnical drilling, a few probably holes for waste conversion drilling. So it's a real mix of things here.
Great. SJ from the chat's got a 2-part question, so I'll tackle them kind of one at a time. I think they're both for Kevin. The first is, can you expand upon the smelter terms indicated in the most recent news release? He'd like to see a rough dissection of the arsenic penalties versus basic TCs.
Yeah, that'll be coming out in the 43101 report, which will come out in January. So have to wait till January to see the third-party consultants IMC's report on the details of, but that'll all be outlined in the 43101 report.
Great.
But I might just add, it's all benchmarked to industry standards, so it's there won't be any surprises when that comes out. It's just it's probably more detailed than we want to get into right here.
Sure. As a second part to that question, he wants to know if the number is reflective of the longer-term smelter terms or more near-term costs, and if there's a large difference.
Probably in between on that. We're certainly not taking advantage of it. At times right now with the volatility in the copper space, there are some extremely attractive terms that are available. But generally, when we work with a contractor like IMC on this, they try to take a medium to long-term outlook on those. So we're not cutting the corners on those by any means at all.
Great.
And they actually are working with a lot of other clients that have arsenic concentrate, so they're pretty switched on to what the real market conditions are, etc. So
one of the reasons Kevin highlighted the 375 that we used for a copper price on that is we would be allowed, both by market regulation and also by our IMC, the group that's doing this, to use a higher copper price. The current prices in the market would allow that, but we intentionally stepped that back down a little bit. And that's based on our experiences. As you might recall, our entire strategy as a company is to find a project like this, drill it out, de-risk it, and sell it to a major. So if we use optimistic prices to inflate a resource or inflate an NPV and a PEA, that's not the way the majors would be evaluating us going forward. So we try to be conservative in that. And I think you'll see that reflected in the treatment costs and arsenic penalties that we use. The arsenic penalties we use are directly from information from CRU on an industry-wide study. So we're using benchmarked information to industry standards.
Great, thanks. TBS, I know these kind of comparative questions are always tough, but he wants to know, how does Altar compare in size to Filo del Sol?
First, you'd have to tell me how big Filo del Sol is. That information's not out there right now. The nature of that project is the drilling's way ahead of what a reported resource is. So we can't really make a comment on that. I think they're both wonderfully large deposits, and each have their pluses and minuses. It's a little not appropriate for us to make direct comparisons there on that. Filo's very large, quite a bit higher than we are. Quite a bit of arsenic associated with it, has some other challenges, but is certainly a spectacular deposit, as evidenced by BHP's interest in that.
Sure. Contact from the chat asks, are you currently carrying out metallurgical tests on leaching using the Newton method?
Yeah, as I actually mentioned in the talk, we currently have small 1 meter columns running. Those were set up not that long ago, so we don't have any results, and we wouldn't be allowed to report those results due to our confidentiality agreement with Newton. But the idea is that when we get the in-flight results, so that's somewhere not to the full end of the test work, but somewhere in the middle, that we will be trying to use that information as a guide towards using that in the PEA. And so stay tuned, but right now we don't even know what the results look like. So, but the work is ongoing right now, and the idea is to have those in-flight results in time to be incorporated in the PEA, which again I mentioned will come out at the end of Q2 2025.
Great, thanks. Jacques from the chat asks, how much molybdenum do you have?
Well, the overall resource, it's about 40 ppm, so that's not economically recoverable or not worth recovering. But having said that, the deeper portions of the ore body have significantly higher moly contents in the range of anywhere from 100 to 500 well, some places over 1,000 ppm moly. And so there is a scenario where potentially, depending, and this is a lot of forward-looking statement and what ifs and caveated to the nth degree here, but there is a scenario where one could imagine that maybe early on you're leaching sulfides, and then as you get deeper, you might want to transition to a concentrator because there's a lot less arsenic deeper in the ore body. So you potentially producing a better copper con, and there is substantial moly down there, so you might want to put a moly circuit in as well. But those are all pie in the sky, forward-looking stuff, and frankly, I hope that's not our decision to be making.
Yeah, no, fair enough. JMac asked in the chat, he notes that several of the larger projects held by juniors seem unlikely to be developed. So what makes Altar different is, I guess, the question.
That's a good point. We do see some of the big deposits held by juniors and also held by majors that are fantastic deposits, but are held up for social or political or other reasons. Some of those situations may be resolved in the future and allowing those deposits to move forward, some are not. So when we look at a top 10 or 15 of most attractive copper projects to be developed, several of them are in the penalty box right now and off the market on this. One of the exciting things about Altar right now is I would argue Altar and other undeveloped projects in Argentina 4 or 5 years ago were probably in that situation as well, where they were great deposits. They were, in some cases, well known, but in a country that didn't have policies in place that made it attractive to develop that type of a project. And that's radically changed with the new Malay government. So we've now entered into a window where a new package of investment incentives have been put in place that have suddenly made Argentina, I wouldn't say much more attractive than other, but it's brought it up to the same level of investable attractiveness as other major mining companies or countries like Peru and Chile. And that's been a radical change. It's backed with international arbitration protection and another number of other things that are making it's clearly attractive to major companies. We've seen a number of major announcements since mid-year when that package of investment incentives were put in place. So that's what suddenly made Argentina not just a place that you can develop a mine, but probably one of the better places to think about developing a mine right now. So we're very fortunate. I'd like to say we foresaw that when we decided to acquire this project in 2018. We did see changes moving in a more positive direction, but I don't think we envisioned it moving this quickly and this convincingly to the situation we're in right now. So this is kind of one of the elements of a perfect storm where we got a great discovery and a great deposit emerging in the right place where there's suddenly a change that allows companies to build mines quickly and in a way that guarantees they can get a return on their investment. So it's a perfect setup for it right now.
Awesome. I got time for one more question before we throw it to last words. But Stefan from the chat asks, what does the anticipated spend look like through all the way to PFS completion in 2026?
We're still working on the second year or two of that time frame just mentioned, but this year we anticipate we'll spend about $25 million US on the project entirely. Keep in mind that we own 80% of the project, or we're just in the process of documenting the move to 80%. 20% of the project is held directly by Sibanye-Stillwater, who we earned into the project from, and so they have the option to pay their 20% of that moving forward. So it's a $25 million US budget for this field season, of which if Sibanye elects to maintain their interest would be $20 million US to us. With the Rio Tinto Newton agreement that we've announced, that provides us with that funding, so we're in good shape for that. And we would anticipate the spend would probably go up for the subsequent year as we move towards the pre-feasibility. But best guidance I can give right now would be, say, between 25 and 40 million US total for that second year of the project, setting us up to be able to put out the pre-fees at the end of 2026. That funding, from our perspective, would also be available through our agreement with Rio Tinto Newton.
Great. Well, obviously this was big news, gentlemen, but I'll leave it to both of you for a last word before we jump today. Kevin, I'll start with you if you don't mind.
Yeah, just again, thank everyone for tuning in and asking some pretty insightful questions. And really, we're quite excited. We kind of, I wouldn't say we want to just blow our own horn here, but really the story at Altar hasn't changed since 2018 when we first picked up the project. I think this is just the fruition and the tangible result of what we've been saying all along for the last 6 years. And so for us, it's kind of a little bit of a, pat ourselves on the back a little bit, because there's a lot of hard work from the team that a lot of investors never see the sacrifice that goes in terms of people's family lives and the time they spend at the project and the miserable weather conditions sometimes. So big shout out to all our team, because like I said earlier, without them, we wouldn't be where we are today.
Great. John, I'll throw it to you for a last word before we jump to that.
Okay, well, I think Kevin covered quite a lot of it there. It's really, this is from the results of hard work from a team that's been very dedicated to this project. And it's not just 2017. Our team in Argentina has been with us since 2005 when we formed our initial company, Antares. And they've put up with us patiently as at times we've been off in other countries with other ventures, and they've stuck with us this whole time. So we've got a great team with a long history with us that have really put in a lot of extraordinary efforts to allow us to get to this point. And also, I think it's very important for us to acknowledge our strategic partners on the project going forward. Sibanye-Stillwater has been very good from us from the start as we've earned into this project. And they continue to monitor and have a toehold in the project. South 32 has come in over the last 2 years with some very well-received strategic placements that have helped us advance the project, and they work closely with us in a technical sense of monitoring the project and moving forward. And then, of course, Rio Tinto Newton is helping out now, evaluating their Newton leach technology to see if we can go forward with the project, but very much providing us with guidance and do it. So when we mention a budget, we actually are well beyond that, because we get quite a few benefits from all of those strategic partners participating. And then Route 1 is our principal shareholder, and they put the funding up for us and encourage us to put our hands on this project when we saw it. So they've been very helpful as well. And then finally, a shout out to the people that have been supporting us, both our long-term shareholders, and we're seeing rotation into new shareholders coming in right now. And we welcome your input on the project moving forward and appreciate your patience. This sometimes takes us a little longer to get to where we want, but everything's coming together at the right time on this project right now. And in terms of when we deliver a discovery like this, we need to be delivering it into a market that's receptive for it. And that's what we're seeing. The obvious pinch point coming up for copper production is sometimes overlooked when we see a slight drop in the copper price or something like this. But we interact with a lot of the major companies, and they're laser focused on making sure they have access to projects that they can develop in the not too distant future to fill that gap. So it's a pretty exciting time. So thanks everybody for watching the story and sticking with it. And it's as Kevin pointed out in part of his presentation there, you haven't missed the boat. This is really just getting started right now, and there's a lot more fun to come up in the not too distant future on the project here. So thanks everybody.
Awesome. John, Dr. Kevin, thank you so much. And thanks everybody for joining us. I hope you have a great rest of your day.